o'clock and we can get started. And I just want to say thank you for coming, everybody, and welcome. My name is Wendy, and I'm here in the South Carolina market. I do business development here, and Rael is going to be talking about Crawlspaces today. So this is part of our 7-part series. And so what we're going to do is just jump right in because there's a lot to talk about. And then what we're going to be doing is doing questions and answers at the end. So if you have any questions that come up as he's going along, please put them in the chat. He'll be able to see those, and then we'll have those conversations after the presentation. So with that, Rael, off we go.
Okay, good morning. And let me just pull the beginning of the program, and we'll get right to it here. So we'll be sharing with lots of photographs actually taken on site in the crawl spaces that we've done over the years. So I was an inspector with Home Probe for 12 years and did run about 3,000 inspections in that period of time. Prior to that, I'd spent 45 years in construction, renovation, real estate, buying and selling rental properties, etc. So I've had a little bit of experience doing this. And the one thing that's great about crawl spaces for me is that now I'm no longer going into them. They were always a challenge, whether they were brand new or whether they were just older resale homes. There were certain restrictions. We're going to cover that in just a second on the actual getting into the crawl space and what we find. I just kind of think back to the early days of perhaps looking at the early days of when we had the original homes. And when we had the original homes, they just had a dirt floor. The home was warmed, probably a log cabin type thing. They just had the dirt floor, and there was a fireplace inside there which provided the heat for the actual home. There were usually maybe one big room, or perhaps a main room and a bedroom or two. And then as things progressed, the floors were actually going to be raised up a little bit. You would imagine with the fact that we have dirt floors, there were all kind of critters and rats and things that would be running around inside that structure. As we came up out of the ground, it became less of an issue with the rodents and things. But really the advantage of having a raised floor was in order to be able to have a heating system installed in the floor. And then having the crawl space is where we'd go in order to repair or light the pilot on these floor furnaces that were there. So if you think of a home that was built in the 40s, 50s, you had a central sort of a gas furnace that was located in the floor itself, and that provided the heat sort of permeating through into the rooms from the central point. As things progressed, we started using furnaces that had a motor and a means of moving the air through ductwork into the different homes. So that's the kind of the way we'll be looking at this this particular webinar and its information. I would imagine that the minimum requirement is 24 inches in the height from the dirt to the floor joist. So that's not a lot of space. It might have been okay when you had those original floor furnaces, but in more modern times, when you have a furnace that's horizontal and placed in our crawl space, and you have the ductwork going through there, we'd imagine at a 24-inch height that there wasn't much room to get in and crawl around in. So let's get on in here to this thing. Here we talk about many homes were built on crawl space in the years gone by to present times. But today, most houses are either built on a concrete slab or a full basement, simply because they found methods now to either put your heating and cooling system up in the attic or into perhaps a garage or a closet downstairs on the main floor. There was no need to actually have a crawl space. Most of your plumbing was underground as well now. So your PVC piping, etc., all of the water, all of the waste lines, they're all under the concrete slab on a on that type of construction. And then, of course, in the full basement, they were visible, right there above the floor. So what we're looking at here is just kind of a change in the whole building procedure. For the most part, with the cost of land today, if there's a slope in the land and there's a possibility of putting in a basement, that's pretty much the way they would go. With a poured concrete foundation, it's a lot more impervious to water intrusion than, say, brick or cement block, masonry block, which is actually porous to a degree, and eventually moisture would make its way into that crawl space. So for the way to do the building now, it's either going to be on a slab or a full basement. So back in the day with the crawl spaces, we needed to have access to the plumbing and the structure. And so, we talked just mentioned that the furnace units were installed when floor furnaces are no longer being used. So the minimum access to that little doorway into our crawl space from the exterior needs to be at least 16 inches wide by 24 inches tall, and then 18 inches wide minimum by 24 through the interior of the home. So you imagine I'm 220 pounds and 6'2". So even that minimum crawl space was kind of a challenge to get into and to get around in. There was only, in all the years that I've been doing this, there was only one agent that ever came into a crawl space with me. She was all of 5'1" and about 95 pounds, so it was a lot easier for her to move around in there. You imagine also that's just not a matter of getting in with your flashlight, but we are wearing coveralls, we're wearing a face mask, and a couple of tools in case there was a furnace down there that needed to have the covers removed, that needed a screwdriver or a wrench, as well as our flashlight. So it was a challenge to do crawl spaces. So here we're looking at one that's on the exterior of the home. And you can see that they've got this little brick build-up and this access door. And you see the foundation that's right there to the right and to the left, which is masonry block. So the actual crawl space depth is at the bottom of where that door is. And that's why they built this little catchment area here to give access to that door without allowing water to really make its way into the crawl space at the time. I mean, people had to come up with really innovative ideas on how to actually get in to the crawl space. In this particular case, on this condominium, there was no access from the outside available. But as you can see here, they've actually cut the hardwood floors and put themselves a hinged flat door that could be raised up, and we could drop down into that crawl space and make a way around from there. Outside, again, difficult situation, but this one had a little door, trap door that we could get on down, lift up part of the deck and get up underneath the home from outside. Another one on the interior. So this one, again, just a door that's removable to get down in there. I mean, for the most, for our method of operation was always to get into those crawl spaces. If there was an area that we could not access for some reason, then we would go ahead and put that into our report as a limitation, because you could pretty much count on the area that we couldn't get into or could not see would most likely be the area that would have a problem present itself over time. So yeah, we would do our very best to get to everything that we could down there, but sometimes it just wasn't possible. There were other methods. If there was perhaps a little bit of a crawl space and they had ventilation there, we could even kind of poke light through the foundation vents and light up some of the areas that we might not have been able to see by crawling through there. Of course, it became more difficult, as I mentioned earlier, once you installed furnaces into crawl spaces with the ductwork, it became a very limited opportunity to do what we always want to do, which is to actually touch all four corners of the crawl space, as well as be able to get ourselves underneath the kitchen and the bathroom areas because that's where the plumbing defects would have been found. So here we see me. I'm getting ready to go. See those little knee pads and the mask and my glasses. I could see fine without them, except when I had to look at my cell phone to take pictures of what I needed to do. But this one was crawling, beyond the deck, all the way up underneath it in order just to get into the crawl space itself. So again, as we mentioned, minimum height requirement of 24 inches between the ground of the crawl space, be it dirt or concrete, to the bottom of the floor joist. And sometimes it was just great. There was a poured slab there, and it just was a matter of getting across it. Many times it was just plain dirt, and there would be sometimes a vapor barrier, plastic, which should be a requirement, and sometimes there was not. And sometimes it might have just been gravel, like big chunks of gravel. It happened to be in a crawl space when I did an inspection on a home where there was an original home, was located pretty far out of town, sort of in an area that had about 12 or 14 acres, somewhat of a little bit of a farm. And they brought in another house on a tractor and put it down next to it and joined the two houses together, sort of having an in-law, instead of an in-law suite, an actual in-law little home attached to the main structure. But what these folks did not know was that what they did is they actually installed that extra house right over the top of a septic tank. And so all that gravel was actually over the drain field of the septic tank. And that was some hard going for the elbows and the knees in that particular crawl space area. While I was under there, I heard the seller speaking to the contractor about getting that septic tank cleaned out. And he was talking about how he'd lost the drain field, and you couldn't see where it terminated. And I was able to come out there and tell him that it was right up underneath that house. So that would have meant that they would have to have built in an extra drain field. Okay, so here we are. We're in our crawl space, and we can see that we've got insulation up above us, and we've got a plastic barrier somewhat down here. You can see a little bit of dirt there. And then this was the end of the original home. And all they had going in there was where the foundation vent had been. So there was no access to get into that new section. And the only way we could see anything at all was with the flashlight from out there. A recommendation would have been to enlarge this hole in order to have full access. You can see here actually with the floor joist, this main beam right here, being that it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 floors, about 20 inches above the ground right here. It was a ledger board, and that ledger board is actually pressure treated lumber, which would have been just fine. Here we are in the crawl space, and so one of the things that we do see are wood destroying organisms, whether it be mold or whether it be, in this case, look at this huge termite tunnel that we've got going on here. It's massive. And there was a lot of termite damage in there. This happened to be a brick foundation and some piers, as you can see, they're standing up there. And this whole area was exposed with dirt, and we needed a vapor barrier here. You see kind of a little bit of a trenched out area along the ends here and across the back here, where the moisture excuse me, the moisture was visible coming through the actual wall. This white stuff that you see on the walls is called efflorescence. It's that chemical reaction that takes place when there's moisture on the wall. And on the inside, of course, being that it's warm and it's damp and it's dark, it's the perfect opportunity for the growth of mold. This one's pretty nasty, as you can see. So we've got a lot of moisture in this one, this darkened area. This is a masonry block crawl space foundation is masonry right here. And you can see the darkened areas, and then again, that efflorescence that's there. But look at the insulation. It's all gotten damp and fallen out from between the joists. and it's a mess. Lots of, water down here. As a matter of fact, even, when we're in there, we're looking at all kinds of stuff. And one of the things that we would remark on is you can see the paper here, which is the backing of the insulation. In actual fact, that paper is a vapor barrier, and it should have been flipped over, and that should have been facing the warm area of the home, the actual interior of the home. And we should have been looking at the yellow or the pink stuff, which is the actual insulation, which should be hanging down. Here we can see that this one's gotten really, really bad, and mold has attached itself to the floor joists, and it actually is destroying and weakening the lumber and the structure that's in there. Again, nothing is impossible to repair, right? It's just going to take that negotiation. And I could tell, when you have a short crawl space like this, you can see the ductwork in the background here. It's difficult to get around. So for the most part, homeowners aren't going to go crawling up underneath their home unless it's absolutely necessary. So it would have been a good idea for these folks to have perhaps a HVAC contractor come out there a couple of times a year and change out their filters and do all the maintenance that they needed to. And then they could have been informed about the fact that there was mold growth down there and have that been remediated. It wouldn't have created a problem. So here, what would need to be done was get in and clean up, remove all of the mold, and then testing and probing to see if the actual plywood or the rafters themselves had deteriorated, and not necessarily having to remove them, but perhaps installation or sistering of another joist right beside the existing one to give it extra strength would have been the way to go here on this particular one. Here we actually have standing water, and when one of the limitations that we have is that if we're in a situation where we need to get into a crawl space and there's standing water, we do not go into that area. Simply, number one is there might be an electrical wire somewhere that's come loose, and it's actually touching the water, which would of course be a hazard that we would not want to attempt the fate. Bottom line is here, this would need to be pumped out first, and then moved on from there to look at this situation. Of course, remediation from the outside to see where the actual water is intruding. A lot of times it was something simple like a downspout that was too close to the foundation. They should all be extended about 6 feet away to be, to be helpful to stop some of this. Perhaps some regrading or installation of a drainage system around the outside of this foundation here would have been helpful. A lot of times you have older apartment complex units that have been converted into condominiums. That was big in the 70s and 80s. That was being done a lot. And for the most part, the owners of the condominiums had no idea of actually what was going on underneath their floors. When I did one recently, I went and opened up the crawl space. There were literally 16 inches of water in that crawl space. And unfortunately, the sellers had no idea, but the HOA was responsible for taking care of that. Unfortunately, it did kill the deal. So that was unfortunate. But there are ways to handle the moisture, and one of them is the encapsulation of the crawl space. The fact is that with crawl spaces, we need ventilation. When you have that ventilation, then you all whenever you have moisture, whenever you have humidity, you have if there's no plastic covering on the floor, then you are going to have that moisture. And again, mold growth is what happens. So when we do the encapsulation, you can see here it's a very sealed and tightened up unit. What we're looking at. What we're looking at here is a taped floor, and then the plastic runs up the wall and taped off at the top, and they actually do close off the foundation vents as well. All right, so when we going through the foundation is visible. Crawl space, of course, basements as well, but we're dealing with crawl spaces today. And when there is some settling, we would see something pretty common, which would be what we call here a stair step crack. And these were most common at the corners of a foundation, because that's where the downspouts terminate, right? So if the downspout is not extended, several feet away from the actual foundation, then this is where the settling takes place at that corner. When we see a stair step crack like that, there's usually going to be a reciprocal crack on the 90-degree wall around the corner as well. Easily remedied, basically can come in and extend those downspouts, fill in these cracks. Sometimes it actually, if it's gotten very, very bad, an engineer can come in and give a scope of work to perhaps pump in some more cement into that foundation area and raise it all back up and secure it. But yeah, mice, rats, possums, squirrels, raccoons, they're all in there. When you get in on newer construction, not so much, but on older construction for sure. I would get in there and you'd see a skin, perhaps 5 or 6 foot long of a snake. So you knew that they'd been there, and you kind of crawl around in there. There's not a lot of room to get up and run away if you see something. But when you see something down there, it can be nerve-wracking somewhat. They tend to hide up between the rafters by the insulation, and they can sometimes just drop out of nowhere and be right up next to you. In one particular case where I was doing a very tight crawl space, I needed to get all the way to the back of it in order to see the area underneath the kitchen sink, because I'd seen some rot underneath that sink, and it was at the very rear of a duplex that I was doing. I had to kind of crawl around a furnace to get there, and it was literally a belly drag because there really wasn't that 24-inch clearance. I actually got my shoulder blades stuck underneath the rafters at one point when I heard some noises up ahead, and took the flashlight up, and sure enough, they were family of the raccoons looking back at me, and they can be very aggressive when they're, so I could not access all the way back there. But again, when we talk about any of these items, how you convey the message to your client, certainly from my point of view as an inspector, we all really want to get to the same point, right? The seller, the buyer, the agent, and everybody, we all want to get to the same point, which is to the closing table. So even though there might be issues, and there are issues with every home, I don't care if it's absolutely brand new construction or whether it's a resale. There's always a way to take care of what needs to be taken care of, and there's no need for the message to be conveyed in such a way that it makes people nervous and scared. If we could put a man on the moon and bring him back, we can certainly fix whatever needs to be fixing in a home, and it's just a matter of renegotiation of that particular thing. Okay, so here we're seeing how furnaces are installed in the crawl spaces. And the one on the left, we see the dirt is right there. So we would recommend perhaps let's get a little vapor barrier in there. And there we have it. It's actually out of the dirt. It's suspended. Over here we have one. You can see how they've built somewhat of a masonry block dugout area here. We're looking at the furnace sitting down there, but you can see there's water here. And there's also a sump pump that's located over here in the bottom left corner to pump out any of the water that's actually coming in, which seems to be significant. And so that's something that we would see, that's something we report, and we would test that sump pump to make sure that it's actually working. You can see also here that the actual unit is sitting up on a couple of masonry blocks. So the actual metal cabinet itself is not sitting in the water, which would cause it to rust out. Okay. Okay, so here we're looking at a much older home. And what we're looking at here is some extra supports had been installed because the floors in this older home over time had started to sag. And that was pretty common. We can see how long this beam is right here, and pretty big and thick, but over time it had settled. And so these extra posts were installed and they were done just fine. You can see how they've been dugout, and they've got an actual footer to them. Same thing here with the original brick piers. So these were just extra insulation. Again, here it would just be a matter of let's have a vapor barrier installed, and that would be it. But sometimes, folks just think that inspectors don't really go into crawl spaces, but we do. And you can see here where there had been an issue where a beam, perhaps rotted or deteriorated, had been removed. And it was supported by this brick pier. So they put in a temporary support right here on this beam that ran from front to rear. And on this side, they just forgot to put the beam right in here. And then, of course, they did not replace that center beam. So these are some of the fun things that we find out when we do go into the crawl spaces. This one, again, had a vapor barrier installed later, but you can see the mold that's formed here already. And in this particular case, we had a beam that was had a joint right here, and they put the support too far to the left. This beam, this support for those beams should have been over here at the joint in the center right here, this point right here. And here we have multiple supports coming down through the crawl space. Again, this is fine, but we would want to have a vapor barrier installed here. But there are all kinds of different ways that folks actually do come in and do this support. So just a masonry block, which is incorrectly installed this way. The masonry block needed to be flat with the holes pointing upwards. And then they just stacked a whole bunch of wood, one on top of the other. That is basically a temporary support. That's the way it would be written up in an inspection report, and the recommendation would be to install permanent supports here for the floor. The issue here, of course, also, of course, is that if this has been set and the floors have been finished above already with ceramic tile or engineered flooring, if we start jacking up floors here to get them to where they need to be, we're probably going to be causing a problem above it. So the way we would have to do this is to put that footer in here and then have that jack installed here, that permanent support to this particular point, but not raise it any further. On this side, you can see how this is old school construction here. We would notch out one piece of the beam and they would actually finger joint into each other. And you can see here how this one has settled. This one was temporarily supported. They should be right at this point right here to support it correctly. And this one, as you can see, is pretty far gone. We're looking at the mold that's down here. And as I mentioned throughout so far, it's the wood destroying organism that's actually in that mold that's weakened the structure. And so with that weight that's coming from above, it's crushed down onto the steel support. And that's why the floor is settled through here. This is a totally rotted out piece of wood right here. We all love a Rubbermaid. I just thought this would be a great picture to show when I was through this crawl space. And what actually had happened here is a repair had been done above to a bathroom. And the shower stall, the pan had rotted out. And so they'd replaced everything, but wanted to put some extra support underneath it. And this is the way they did it. So kudos to Rubbermaid for being able to support the floor that was underneath the shower. We would always, in the crawl space, we're looking for that main water shutoff. That would always be in our reports. So here's a picture of it. So you can see here where we have the main shutoff with that blue valve. And in this particular section of the water supply, it is actually PVC. If we look over to our left here, we know that it's an older home because we are seeing galvanized supply piping coming from the street. And in this section right here, we can see that there's still some cast iron, which is also beyond its life expectancy, as is the galvanized steel. That would go into the report as information, but you can see here there's PVC waste piping as well, and that's been upgraded. We always, here's another picture of a water shutoff valve. So we're always going to have that. We'll always crawl around and actually find that. It's amazing how when somebody's out of town, whoever stayed behind would have to come up with where the actual water shutoff is and be able to get down there to turn it off. Here we're looking at what we've been discussing throughout, which is the efflorescence, that moisture that's on our cement block wall. You see here they've built another wall on the interior, and they've got somewhat some drainage running in the trench between the exterior foundation wall and the new wall that's been created. So here you can see the actual gravel. And we can see actually even on this wall, those rusty looking spots is the moisture. So, you're looking at a cement block here where the holes are actually pointing vertically. So whatever moisture is intruding is coming in and then going down to the very bottom of the foundation area. And that's why we've got the gravel. There's probably going to be some piping in there with some splits in the pipe to catch that water and carry it down to the lowest point of that crawl space, where we either have a pump to eject the water that's coming down through there, or it's traveling to the exterior of the actual foundation. Some more of it right here. We see that all that moisture on that wall, and here we have an ejection pump sitting in the floor to carry that water to the outside. Okay, so even when we're looking at all those other things with plumbing, we see that underneath this area right here, we actually have some water stain and rot on our subfloor. This is an older home again, but you see the planks, which were 3/4 boards. These are like 3/4 by 8, but they've been rotted out underneath here. Again, minor fix and easily to handle. All right, so we can, when we see something like this, this is the way it would be written up. Temporary supports, no issues. Although there are no issues with temporary or supplemental supports installed in the crawl space, they're usually done in response to some type of movement or settling and as a temporary corrective measure. Although there were no issues noted, they were a concern at the time. It's recommended that a qualified contractor install more permanent supports that are properly secured at the top and the bottom. At the top, there would be a plate with a couple of holes through that you could attach them with some bolts or some screws to the rafter. And at the bottom, there would be also the same type of process. We'd drill a hole into the concrete and put the screws or bolts down below. Sometimes you just looking at gaps, no mortar. These are all things that we were finding in our crawl space. Some more supports there. And then if we had some settling or if we had issues, these would be photographed and put into the report as well. So you can see there are all kinds of different methods of putting in. I even found a tree trunk in there one time that was being used to support the main beam. But so this is the kind of information we have, and this is kind of electrifying. There was actually a wall built out of old car batteries that was built in as a wall in this one crawl space. So electrical as well, lots of open junction boxes, flying splices, all that kind of stuff. We see that, photograph it, and it's been in the last several years we've started installing insulation up underneath the floor. So if we do have it missing, we will point it out. Regulator, we need to make sure that the water regulator is in there. This one happens to be leaking, so we pointed that out. You can see some rust here. So before that plastic barrier was put in there, it was probably a lot of moisture in that crawl space. I'm looking also to that cast iron because it's beyond its life expectancy. Life expectancy was 75 years, and we're about in the 100-year mark for the age of this right now. Missing insulation on the ductwork. That's pretty common. Today, we don't use much rigid pipe anymore. Mainly the ductwork is sort of flexible, and that's already insulated in itself. So there we are, right at the about the 30-minute mark. And just going to check in and see if there were any questions. I do not see any here. So
yeah, I don't see any either. Anybody have any questions out there? What a great presentation, Rael.
Thanks.
Crawl spaces are always a subject in the reports, so it's great to have this additional knowledge.
We do lots of these things.
Yes, yes, we do. We have hours and hours and hours. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and just to remind you that this is number 5 in a series of 7. We're kind of taking you through a virtual inspection, but more in depth on each topic. So next Thursday at 10 o'clock, we're going to be talking about the electrical system. So please join us for that. If you've registered, well, you've already registered for this, so you will be getting an email and a link for that one as well, so you don't need to re-register. But we hope that you can join us. And then also for our South Carolina folks, we have a CE. It's a brand new one. It's going to be coming on the 16th from 10 to 12, and it's going to be called Handling the Home Inspection Like a Top Producer. So we're really excited about this topic. We're doing it in both Georgia and South Carolina, and we've interviewed a number of top producing agents, and it really is kind of going over the process from when you are first meeting with your client through, closing the property, or, getting to that final phase when they get the keys in their hand, and just how to navigate your clients through it and just learn from the experiences from others. So we hope that you can join us. And again, thank you. And we will see you next week. Thank you,
tell
Rael.
them about Home Probe Academy.
Yes, well, all of this is going to be on Home Probe Academy. So the same website that you've joined us on today. Keep checking the schedule, because each month it does differ. We have different topics to kind of try to run a theme. So and those will have the webinars, and they also will have the various CEs that we have on there. We've got lots of stuff coming up in the near future. So keep checking that, and we hope to see you next week.
And there was one question that just popped up. I think it's from Marsha. Yes, we recommend that every crawl space has, if it's dirt, has a vapor barrier in them. That's where the moisture actually gets into, even if there's no intrusion on the actual outside walls. There is moisture in the soil, so that's why we always recommend that vapor barrier. Again, thanks so much for joining us, folks, and I hope.
Oh, and there is and now we're getting some things. John had asked regarding the presentation if there's a link. If you miss one of these, be sure and check on our video library tab in Home Probe Academy, because in there you're going to find videos of these various topics, as well as some others that aren't a part of this, like mold, and talking about pre-listing inspections, all kinds of topics in there. So be sure and check that as well. It may not have all of them, and if there's one specifically that you're looking for, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can sure look into that for you, but there's a number of them on there for you. So it's the video library tab on the Home Probe Academy website. So take a look there. And John, if you can't find it, just reach out to me, and I will definitely look into that for you. So thank you for that question. I think we're good. All right. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.